Hi, I'm Doug, and I'm a biologist. Gregor Mendel is known as the father of modern genetics. He was the first to study the passing of traits from parent to offspring, and his studies laid the foundation for modern genetics. Before Mendel, inheritance was thought to be blending, so if you cross a red flower with a white flower, all you'd get were pink flowers. Mendel showed that this was not true. Mendel studied pea plants. He took tall plants, crossed them with short plants, but instead of getting intermediate-sized plants, he got nothing but tall plants in the offspring. And when he took those offspring and self-pollinated them, out came both tall and short plants in the offspring. Mendel did the same thing with the color of the peas. He took green-peed plants and crossed them with yellow-peed plants and got nothing but green-peed plants in the offspring. But when he self-fertilized those offspring, in the next generation, both yellow and green peas came out. So what does this show? It shows that traits are inherited as factors, what we now call genes, and that not every gene you have is expressed, but they can be transmitted to the next generation and be expressed later. One way to understand how particulate inheritance is different is to use the Punnett square.
Each different form of a particular gene is called an allele. There's an allele for blue eyes, an allele for brown eyes, an allele for green peas, and an allele for yellow peas.
If we look on one part of the Punnett square, we have the two alleles contributed by the father. If we look on another part, we have the two alleles contributed by the mother. Under blending inheritance, all those offspring should look the same. But that's not what happens. If we use the Punnett square, we realize that there are different types of offspring produced. There are homozygote. A homozygote is where an individual has two alleles that are the same. There are heterozygotes. A heterozygote is an individual where the two alleles are different. With Mendel, when he took green and yellow peas, you'll notice that you get both green and yellow peas in the offspring. Mendel's experiments led him to find two laws. Let's talk about the law of segregation. A parent has two alleles. The law of segregation says that those two alleles are transmitted independently to the offspring. They segregate. One allele is given to one offspring, another allele is given to another. Mendel's second law is independent assortment. Let's go back to Mendel's peas. Some peas are tall, some peas are short, some have yellow seeds, and some have green seeds. Independent assortment means that the genes that are transmitted to the offspring for seed color are transmitted independently of the genes for height, so that we can get all combinations in the offspring. Genotype refers to the genes the organism has. Phenotype refers to the physical appearance. My genotype is to have two blue-eyed genes. My phenotype is to have blue eyes. The key to understanding what is a dominant and a recessive allele refers to what the organism with a particular genotype, that is what genes they have, with an organism's phenotype. How do they look? I have blue eyes. I know I have two copies of a gene for blue eyes. Let's say little b, little b. Somebody else has brown eyes. They might have two copies of a brown-eyed gene. Let's call them big B, big B. So then the question is, what are the color of the eyes of the heterozygote, big B, little b? That depends on which allele is dominant. In humans, brown is dominant. So the big B, little b genotype, the heterozygous genotype, is brown-eyed. That means that the brown allele is dominant to the blue allele. A monohybrid cross is a cross between two heterozygous individuals. Imagine we cross two people with brown hair. Both are heterozygous for the hair color gene. We can use a Punnett square to show that the offspring produce both heterozygotes and homozygotes. They'll produce one homozygote of one type, one homozygote of another, and two heterozygotes. What do these look like? Well, in the case of brown-haired heterozygote, they'll produce brown-haired homozygotes, and they'll produce brown-haired heterozygotes, and they'll produce blonde-haired homozygotes. The phenotypes that result from a monohybrid cross segregate in a 3-to-1 ratio. For a dihybrid cross, things get a little more complicated. Now imagine the same cross as a monohybrid cross, but let's consider two traits. Not just hair color, but eye color as well. That's where we need our Punnett square to get bigger, because we have to look at the transmission and segregation of all those alleles for both those traits. In this case, a heterozygote who has brown hair and brown eyes mates with another heterozygote with brown hair and brown eyes. We can follow the transmission through to the next generation. You'll notice that all of the parents had brown hair and brown eyes, but the offspring are variable. Mendel showed that these segregate out in a 9:3 to 3:1 ratio. 9 individuals have brown eyes and brown hair. 3 individuals have brown hair and blue eyes. 3 individuals have blonde hair and brown eyes. And 1 individual has blonde hair and blue eyes.
So what have we learned?
Gregor Mendel is known as the father of genetics because he was the first person to successfully study heredity, or the passing of traits from parent to offspring, and his studies laid the foundation for modern genetics. Mendel's law of segregation states that during fertilization, alleles randomly pair to produce 4 possible combinations. Mendel's law of independent assortment states that genes for different traits are inherited independently of each other. Dominant alleles are expressed in the offspring even if only one dominant allele is present. Recessive alleles must occur in pairs in order for the recessive trait to be seen. Homozygous refers to the fact that an organism has 2 of the same allele for a particular trait, 2 dominant alleles or 2 recessive alleles. Heterozygous refers to the fact that an organism has 1 dominant allele and 1 recessive allele. Genotype is the combination of alleles in an organism, so a heterozygous genotype would consist of 1 dominant allele and 1 recessive allele. Phenotype is a physical appearance of the organism. For example, tall pea plants versus short pea plants, or green peas versus yellow peas.